So HLPs. So HLPs are basically a group of practices that a big group of professionals agreed are essential for effective teaching for all students. They're supported by research. They're broadly applicable, so they're not specific to any content area. They span all the content areas. And they're things that you use all the time, all day, every day. There are many, many HLP resources available through the CTERM Center. I have a link on this page if you're interested in learning more about them. This book is also a great resource for learning more about HLPs. And this is the book that I use when I teach about HLPs, and the book I use to help plan this session today. So there's a link to where you can find this book also on this page in the presentation notes. These are the HLPs for instruction. So there are 3 sets of HLPs. For HLPs for collaboration, HLPs for social, emotional, behavioral learning, and HLPs for instruction. This is the set for instruction. There are 11 or 12 of them. And the one we're going to focus on today is teaching cognitive and metacognitive strategies to support student learning. Again, all of these are broadly applicable, so they can be used in reading and math classrooms. This one I chose because I feel like it's really high impact across both content areas. And it's something that I don't see as often as some of these others. Some of these others people do, all day, every day as part of typical practice. Strategy instruction is something that I see a little less frequently. So it's what I wanted to focus on today. Okay, so strategy instruction involves teaching students how to learn and perform. Students can use cognitive and metacognitive strategies to solve problems, regulate their attention, organize their materials, monitor their own thinking and their own work. And they're, again, broadly applicable. Our goal with strategy instruction is to help students become self-directed, strategic learners who are able to identify and reach their learning and behavioral goals. And when I say strategic learner, what I mean is someone who uses strategies that they've been taught and is systematic about how they use strategies. So they can pick the most efficient strategy for their needs at the time, and they can adjust strategies as they need to when the exact way they've learned it isn't exactly working for the situation. So thinking a little bit more about strategic and non-strategic learners. Strategic learners can analyze a problem, make a plan for solving it, can access their background knowledge that can help them to solve a new challenge, can develop new organizational and procedural strategies as the task becomes more complex, use effective self-regulation strategies so they're able to track their progress, monitor their progress, and fix up when things aren't working. And can review task-oriented goals and determine whether they've been met. So they know whether or not they've achieved the goal they set out for. Non-strategic learners, on the other hand, are unorganized, often can be impulsive, not sure where to begin with an assignment, not sure how to break an assignment or a task down into steps that are more manageable, can get kind of overwhelmed by the magnitude of a task, can have problems with memory, trouble focusing, trouble with persisting, give up easily, experience feelings of frustration, failure, anxiety. So this non-strategic learner category often is going to catch a lot of our students with disabilities, but it also catches a lot of other students in our classrooms. So we're going to head on to our first breakout rooms to kind of get our own background knowledge going and to reflect and discuss on any of these 3 prompts that are listed here. So You can talk about a time when one of your students really exemplified that definition of a strategic learner, somebody who picks the most efficient strategy, can adjust the strategy as they need. When a task or problem is a little different or more challenging than they're used to, at the end, they know whether they've met their goal. Or you can talk about a time when you exemplified the definition of a strategic learner and are outside of school. Or you can think and talk about past students who have been non-strategic learners and what would happen, how they would react when they encountered really challenging problems. Is back from breakout rooms. When I visited 2 breakout rooms and I heard really great conversations about strategic learners, non-strategic learners, and in a variety of different situations. So I'm glad we got our juices flowing and everyone was able to think about and share about some experiences they've had with kids that are more strategic and less strategic. When we were in breakout rooms, also, I realized that I could share links with everyone for all the documents for this presentation. I know you all got a folder, I think, yesterday, but I want to give you access to everything in Google Drive so that you can easily grab things as we're talking today. I'm going to put a link for the everything in Drive in the chat here. So that'll give you access to my slides, but then also some of the other documents that we're going to look at as we keep moving through the presentation today.
Stephanie, I did also put all of the stuff that you sent me into their large folder for CTERM. And there's a separate folder for your high leverage practice. So I'm assuming it's all the same information that you had sent me earlier.
Yeah, it's all the same.
Okay. So yeah, you guys can get it into this and you can get to it through the CTERM folder as well.
Okay, great. So am I still screen sharing? Are you still seeing my presentation?
No.
Okay, I thought I needed to reset that. There we go. All right. So as we move forward and talk about cognitive and metacognitive strategy instruction, how we can help students become more strategic learners, I wanted to just give you some quick examples of cognitive strategies. So in math, cognitive strategies are things like general problem-solving strategies or heuristics. You might have heard of UPS check, or that stands for understand, plan, solve, and check your problem, or RUN, which is read your problem, underline the question, name the problem type. These sort of general strategies that span all different types of problems. Computation strategies, one is called draw. I'll show you what that is in a minute. Mnemonics, I'll show you some examples of those too. And then in reading, some example cognitive strategies are things like, for comprehension, summarizing and identifying key elements in a story or identifying a text structure. In phonics, things like recognizing and blending common chunks within words and vocabulary using context clues. So all of these sort of general strategies that we can apply across texts, across problem types, are examples of what I mean when I'm talking about cognitive strategies. And metacognitive strategies or skills are the processes that we use as we're using cognitive strategies. So things like determining which strategy is the best one to apply to a task. Coming up with a goal, like figuring out what the end goal is for a task or a problem. Monitoring how well the strategy is working as you're going. And then maybe adjusting the strategy to make it work better for your needs or the problem type. Changing up or fixing a strategy, like I just mentioned. So those metacognitive skills are things that we want students to always be applying as they're working with cognitive strategies. So let's look at some examples. I mentioned UPS check, problem solving strategy. UPS stands for understand, plan, solve, and check at the end. And within each of those sort of chunks, there are sets of steps you want students to work through as they're solving problems. So for example, in the understand phase of problem solving, students read the problem, underline important information, put the problem in their own words, find the question. And there are steps within each sort of phase of the problem solving strategy. The draw strategy for basic operations is discover the sign. So figure out what type of problem I'm solving, what operation, read the problem, answer the problem or draw and check, and write the answer. Again, really simple strategy that spans all the basic operations. A mnemonic strategy, an example of a mnemonic strategy. Many dogs are smelly. This is a reminder about order of operations. Basically, we solve multiplication and division problems first, M and D, and those are color coded together. So to let you know that you could work either operation first, and then addition and subtraction, A and S, are color coded together blue to let you know you could work either of those operations in either order as well. So many dogs are smelly. GEMDAS is another one that you are probably familiar with. And then there are procedural strategies that are essentially just sets of steps, procedural steps that students can follow to solve a specific type of problem. So these are more specific to one type of problem versus the other examples that we've looked at so far that are kind of span a bunch of different problems. All right, so we looked at some examples. I want to think for a minute about why, when, and who strategy instruction is for. So why we talked about a little bit already. We want students to become strategic learners. We want them to be self-directed. When it's important to prioritize high utility strategies. So you can't teach a strategy for every single skill and concept and behavior across every content area all year. It would be overwhelming to students and overwhelming to you. And when you teach too many strategies too quickly or too close together, students tend to get the steps mixed up and have a hard time remembering which strategies apply to which situations or problem types. So you've got to prioritize. You want to focus on teaching strategies for skills that are really critical or really complex and challenging. Strategy instruction can take place during whole class instruction in small groups or on an individual basis as needed. So it's flexible in that way. And for who? Again, for one student, for a small group, for everyone, depending on the needs of the students in your class. By who? Again, very flexible. By the gen ed teacher, the special ed teacher, by both together. Again, depending on your goals for strategy instruction and who you're targeting. Strategy instruction, I think it's important to think about this reciprocal relationship between the teacher and the student with strategy instruction. With all types of instruction, students and teachers share some responsibility for learning. But with strategy instruction, the responsibility shifts back and forth in a way that's kind of unique. So initially, the teacher has primary responsibility for teaching the strategy. The teacher has to notice that the student is having a challenge with something or pick a target skill that they know a lot of students are going to really struggle with. come up with a strategy, and then teach it. So model it, think aloud through the process of using the strategy, and really spend that time teaching. Then once students have initial instruction in this strategy, the teacher and the student start to share responsibility. So the teacher is now giving students opportunities to practice the strategy, and the students need to engage. They need to put in the effort, and they need to work to memorize the strategy skills. Then responsibility sort of shifts more to the student. Now the student knows the strategy, the teacher has facilitated practice and knows that they can use it. Now the student has to use that strategy as a tool when situations come up where it's a useful tool, where it's appropriate for them to use. So we're going to spend a little bit more time now talking about the reciprocal relationship between teachers and students when we're giving strategy instruction. We're going to head to breakout rooms again. In the folder that Kristen shared with you, and in the folder that I just shared with you, the Google link, you'll find a document that is called, I think it's called Example of Teacher-Student Responsibility. It provides an example of a situation in narrative and text of a teacher identifying a need, teaching a strategy, and the student learning the strategy and then starting to learn to apply it. It's about a page and a half of text. So I want you to read that and then talk with your group. Coming back from breakout rooms, I'm going to share my screen again.
Stephanie, as everyone's coming back, you had a question in the chat. I'm not sure if you wanted to address it now or.
Yeah, I didn't see it. Let me open the chat up so I can see if it's there. Johnny Green's question is that we're discussing strategies that most of us use on a regular basis. What would you suggest, or what would be some of the things that the group has done in a classroom setting to lead the students to an understanding of the importance of strategy use? That's a great question. We're gonna get there. I think the first step in strategy instruction when you're introducing new strategies has got to be getting students buy-in. Like, you want to use one, goal setting so that students have a purpose, and then monitor progress towards whatever your goal is with the strategy. And two, spend a lot of time teaching students why the strategy is important, how it works, and how it helps them. I have a colleague who recommends that you have your students help you name your strategies as a way to help get them buy-in. And I think that's a nice idea too. But we'll talk a little bit more about all of that as we keep moving forward. The link for the PowerPoint again, I saw that just pop up. I'll do that too. So what happened there? I'm going to share the link for this whole folder. So the PowerPoint is in here. The other documents I'll ask you to look at or wanted to share with you are in here too. There you go. All right, I heard great conversation. You're welcome. Oh, I see another question here. How much time do you recommend to set aside to successfully integrate high leverage practices into the classroom? Well, high leverage practices in general, I think, should be the meat and potatoes of your instruction. So really, almost all of your time, if you look at the high leverage practices, they're so broad and there are so many of them that you're probably doing one of them at all times all day long during instruction. The book that I shared, this High Leverage Practices for Inclusive Classrooms, it's blurring with the screen filter on. That book is a really great resource for thinking through how to use the high leverage practices, how to apply them, like how to use them in a practical way throughout your day. So I would say, like, as a general rule, who's the author? James McCleskey is the lead author. McCleskey, McLeskey. And the link for where you can find the book is in my PowerPoint. I actually looked when I was setting up the PowerPoint if it was cheaper on Amazon or cheaper through the Cedar Center. I think it's cheaper through the Cedar Center. It's not a very expensive book. It's $20 or $30, I think. So yeah, as a general rule, high leverage practices all day long. And you're probably already doing a lot of it, but the book will give you some ideas for how to get more bang for your buck, I guess, out of the way that you're doing it, the way you're using those practices. Okay, so I heard great conversations again in the breakout rooms. We're spending a lot of time in breakout rooms, but I really am appreciating the way that you're using them and talking to each other through these prompts. I heard a lot of really interesting conversation about how people have used strategy instruction that came up as they were reading the prompt about the solar system strategy. All right, so we'll keep moving forward. I want to make sure that we get through the presentation. So before we look at how to plan and provide instruction and strategies in our classrooms, I want to give you some resources you can come back to find existing cognitive and metacognitive strategies. Center on instruction, Center on positive behavioral intervention supports, the Evidence-Based Intervention Network, Intervention Central, the IRIS Center, NCII, What Works Clearinghouse. These are all places you can go and find existing strategies that are evidence-based and that are ready to go. I'm going to talk to you about how you can create your own strategies, but if you don't always need to create something new, right? There's a lot out there that already exists and is ready to go. And these are some really great places to find things that you can use that are ready for you. What we're going to spend a lot of the rest of the presentation on is creating your own strategies. So if you can't quite find the thing that you need, the strategy that you need for a specific child or a specific situation, what we're going to talk about now is creating your own. So there are three main steps, I would say, in creating your own strategies and providing your own strategy instruction. The first one is completing a task analysis to break down the skill or the procedure or the concept that you want to teach with a strategy. The second step is defining your steps or procedures that students are going to use to complete the strategy and reach their goal. And the third step is explicitly teaching the strategy to students. So we're going to work through all of these with an example and see what this can look like. Before I do that, though, I just want to expose you to two strategy instruction frameworks. So these are sets of steps that are, what we're going to work through is these three steps today. Basically define your strategy, package it for students, and teach it. The two strategy frameworks I'm just going to expose you to really quickly here do the same thing, but in a much more intensive way. So I would say if you're working with kids that have really high support needs, you might want to check out more information about one of these strategy instruction frameworks because they provide much more intensive strategy instruction guidance. The first one is the SIM, Strategic Instruction Model, and the second one is Self-Regulated Strategy Development. Self-regulated strategy development is it's a research-tested, validated framework for providing explicit strategy instruction. It includes a really strong emphasis on self-regulation. strategies. So self-monitoring, self-instruction, goal setting, reinforcement. And it follows this set of steps with students. Basically, develop their background knowledge, discuss the strategy. This is where you would focus on getting buy-in and telling students the importance of the strategy and getting them to really understand why they need to learn to use it. Then model the strategy, have students memorize the steps, support the strategy. So really, this is providing a lot of practice with feedback, and then establish independent practice. That's the basic set of steps. In the PowerPoint, I have links in the notes for these slides to send you to resources for more information if you want to learn more about SRSD or the strategic instruction model. The strategic instruction model is also evidence-based, and the set of steps that the SIM works through is similar to SRSD, but a little bit different. First, you pre-test and make commitments. Make commitments is about goal setting. You describe the strategy for students, model, do verbal practice, do more practice with feedback, do more practice with feedback, post-test and make commitments. So again, check, this is about goal setting, checking on whether students have met their goals, and then work on generalization or work on students' ability to transfer the strategy to new contexts, new situations, new problems. Again, there are some links in the PowerPoint to send you for more information. Of the two, SRSD, self-regulated strategy development, is easier to find resources that are free. The strategic instruction model, SIM, most of the resources are behind a paywall, and you need a certified trainer to provide training. But it's worthwhile. It's a great program. If your district has money and wants to focus on strategy instruction, it's a great option. Okay, so we're going to work on this sort of pared down version of a strategic instruction model, where we're going to work through these 3 steps. Again, the first step, you want to first, after you identify your skill or concept or procedure that you want to focus on with a strategy, your first step is task analysis, breaking it down so that you really understand and you really define as clearly as possible what students need to do to accomplish the task, strategy, procedure. The example I'm going to use is a math example. So say you've identified a student or a group of students, or know your whole class is going to struggle with dividing proper fractions. When you do your task analysis of the skill, you basically are just identifying every step that students need to take to complete the skill. So in this case, initially, I thought about procedural steps. Invert the divisor, simplify if you need to, then multiply numerators and denominators. If your quotient is improper, then reduce, simplify if you need to. If it's proper, just simplify if needed. So simple set of procedural steps. But I also know that I want students to understand what they're doing when they're dividing fractions. I want them to understand the concept. So I want them to understand why, when they divide a larger dividend by a smaller divisor, why their quotient is going to be larger than either of the terms in the problem. And when they're dividing a smaller dividend by a larger divisor, the quotient is going to be less than 1. I want them to understand these concepts. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going into this here, but if anyone who wants to talk about this, shoot me an email. So after thinking about the procedural steps and the concept that I really want students to understand, I revised my task analysis to include some steps that are going to get students thinking about those concepts, as well as the basic procedural steps. So now I'm having students start by asking, am I dividing a larger dividend by a smaller divisor? That's a how many question. Or am I dividing a smaller dividend by a larger divisor? That's a how much question. And then to ask, am I expecting a quotient that's greater or less than 1? So before I even get into my procedural steps, I want students estimating based on what they understand about the concepts of fraction division. Then invert the divisor, simplify, multiply, reduce and simplify. And then at the end, coming back to the concepts, ask, does my quotient make sense? Based on what I was thinking about when I got started and what I was expecting to see. And then I added a step to check. So now I've got my task analysis up to about 7 steps, which is about the maximum number of steps you want to ever include in a strategy for students. When you're getting beyond 7 steps, you want to break it up into chunks and present it in chunks. Okay, so after defining my task and now getting my task analysis finished, defining my steps that I want to use, my next task is to figure out how I want students to work through this strategy to meet the goal of being able to solve these problems, fraction division, and understand what they're doing. So I sort of think of this step as packaging your strategy. Once you do your task analysis, you know the steps you want students to take to solve a problem or complete a task. Then you want to think about how are you going to facilitate students being able to do this? How are you going to package it for students? In this case, for this example, I made a strategy checklist. So I've got my visual representations that sort of illustrate my concepts up at the top of the page, the front page that students are going to have, and a checklist with this actual steps they're going to take at the bottom. And then on the back of this sheet, I've got 2 worked examples. So you see each step in the strategy on the left column, or an explanation there with 2 example problems. And the examples, one is a problem with a larger dividend, and one is a problem with a smaller dividend. So the examples that I'm providing sort of span the range of the problems that students are going to have to solve and understand when they're dividing proper fractions. So this is something that I would provide as a support. I would recommend providing some kind of support when you're initially providing instruction and when students are first starting to do some guided practice. But this is something that you also want to eventually fade. You don't want students to rely on this type of support forever. You want to eventually be able to take this away. Okay, so we went through step 1, task analysis, and step 2, sort of packaging, figuring out how you're going to support students and starting to learn the strategy. What we're going to do now is head out to another breakout room and spend a little bit of time thinking through this process with a group. All coming back from breakout rooms. I tried again to visit as many as I could, and again, heard really great conversations in breakout rooms about strategies that you're already using and that you talked through together. All right, so we've talked about task analysis, defining your steps and procedures and how you're going to package that and present it to students so that they have a support. Now we're going to talk about explicitly teaching strategies. So the guidelines for explicit strategy instruction Pre-teach your prerequisite skills. Make sure students have whatever prerequisite skills they're going to need to use the strategy. Teach how, when, where, and why to use the strategy, including the importance of each step. So this gets, again, at the idea of like building buy-in and getting students to understand why you're teaching the strategy and to motivate them to want to learn to use it. Break the strategy down into chunks if it's a big one. If it's got many steps, you want to break it down so they're manageable pieces. Provide clear demonstrations with Think Aloud. The Think Aloud is especially important when we're talking about building those metacognitive skills as part of strategy use. Give students lots of opportunities for practice. Students need a lot of practice, much more than we typically give, to be able to learn to use strategies. We want to monitor, provide feedback, give lots of positive reinforcement. And then continue to provide opportunities for practice over time so that students retain what they learn and they learn to generalize it. All right, so we're going to look at the example again with each of these sort of guidelines for providing explicit strategy instruction. First, you want to pre-teach prerequisite skills. Again, if students, there are things they need to know to be able to use the strategy, you want to make sure that you teach those first before you introduce the strategy. You might do that in small groups. You might do it on an individual basis, depending on your group and your needs. So for my example of dividing proper fractions, some pre-skills you might think about that students need before they're ready for that strategy. They have to be able to multiply fractions. They have to be able to reduce. They have to be able to simplify. They have to be able to compare. All of those are important pre-skills that I would want to teach before jumping into the strategy instruction. Teach how, when, where, and why. So again, you're building buy-in, also teaching students how to discriminate between strategies and pick the one that makes the most sense for a given problem or situation. For dividing proper fractions, the how, students are going to follow the checklist. They're going to consult those worked examples on the strategy sheet. And they're going to look at the division concepts notes again on the strategy sheet. When they're dividing proper fractions, so they're going to have to learn to recognize that problem type. And why, in general, to stay organized while they're working through these problems. But also there's a why behind each step in the strategy. And that's really important when you're providing your initial instruction. So as an example, the first step in the strategy is ask myself, am I dividing a larger dividend by a smaller divisor or a smaller dividend by a larger divisor? The why behind that step is to build our understanding of the meaning of dividing proper fractions and to set an expectation for the magnitude of our quotient so that later we can judge whether the quotient we got is reasonable, right? That's why we're doing this step. So you want to teach students the why behind, I think I fleshed this out for a couple of steps. And since we're running low on time, I don't want to spend a lot of time here. But you want to flesh out the why behind each step, explain it to students and get them to see the value in it. Like, what's the point? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this step? You want to provide that information for students and explain why it's important. Okay. Why? That third guideline is break the strategy into chunks. So an example again is this UPS check strategy. This is a lot of steps, right? I might spend, if we break it up into chunks, all the U steps together, then the P, then the S, then the check, I might spend a week on just understand steps, right? I'm not going to present this entire strategy in one lesson, even 2 or 3 lessons. This is probably going to be weeks worth of instruction, learning to work through all of these steps. And we want to make sure that students get the chance to practice working through all of the steps with feedback before we're moving on and giving them more. The next guideline is providing really clear step-by-step demonstrations with Think Aloud. Model, model, model. One example is never enough, even for really simple strategies. We want to give students several high-quality models, maybe over a couple of days and over a couple of lessons, maybe more, depending on the needs of students. We want to show and tell students exactly how to apply the strategy as we think aloud, narrating our thought process, our decision-making as we go. We also want to make sure we provide explicit modeling of using any materials that we're giving students. So in the example there, I made this checklist. I want to show students explicitly how to use the checklist. I want to walk them through what it looks like when I'm using the checklist so that they have a model that they can refer to when it's their turn to do some practice. I have an example of what modeling would look like, but I think I'll skip that in the interest of time as well. We want to provide numerous opportunities for practice. So again, students need more practice than we think. After we give them several models, we want to give them guided practice where we're scaffolding support. So initially, really walking them through practice, kind of holding their hand through practice, giving them all the support they could need, and gradually pulling that back until they're more and more independent. And then finally, promote maintenance and generalization. So maintenance is really just retaining the skill over time. And generalization is learning to apply the skill in new contexts, in new situations, with new people, depending on what the skill is. So the best ways to do those things are, number one, distributed practice. Making sure that students practice and then practice again later, and then practice again a couple of weeks later, so that they don't have an opportunity to forget and lose the skill. In terms of generalization, things that really are helpful are simulations. So you create a situation where the strategy is the most efficient, best thing for students to use, or situations that are challenge or sabotaging situations. And those give students opportunities to make those adaptations or use fix-up strategies as they're working. So you create a sabotaging situation where the strategy doesn't quite fit, and you need to stretch or adjust a little bit to make it work. All right, and the last thing I had planned here was to talk about co-teaching in strategy instruction. And again, I think we're just about out of time, so we're not going to have time for this last breakout group. But I made this table and included it in the Drive folder that I've shared with you. So this is something that you could print and talk through with your co-teacher when you're talking about providing strategy instruction. How and when are you going to provide each of these components of instruction? Who's going to be the primary person who's responsible? How is the other teacher going to support? What else do you need to make it work? And sort of think through that together as a team when you're thinking about providing strategy instruction. All right, here are your key points. And my email address again, for anyone who wants to reach out, if you have questions about this or questions about anything to do with strategy instruction, or if you have math instruction questions you want to talk about for your kids with disabilities, I would love to hear from you. I see some stuff I missed in the chat. People appreciated the breakout groups. I'm glad about that. Generalization is difficult for special ed kids because it can be stoic and fixed in their thinking. Yes, very true, which is why we need to be really deliberate in what I would call programming for generalization. So we need to be thinking about generalization when we're planning our instruction, and especially when we're planning our practice. Practice is where kids get the opportunity to generalize, and we can manipulate practice and plan it in ways that kind of scaffold that process. So like I said, simulations are a really nice way to do that. You create situations where students can find opportunities to use the strategy, and you can scaffold how much support you provide for them being able to find the opportunities on their own. And once you build some generalization that way, you can have students apply skills in different settings with different people around, to different problem types. It all depends on what you're teaching, obviously. And then when students are really confident and getting stronger with the skill, then you can try some of the sabotaging situations where you kind of throw a wrench in things on purpose and help them figure out how to fix up a strategy or make an adjustment or stretch something to make it work and still get to the goal. So it's a lot of work. It's really a lot of work. Sabotage, love it. Yeah, it can be really fun, especially when you need students to have a lot of trust in you, and it needs to feel like a really safe environment. And you need to prepare students for what you're going to do. Tell them we're gonna throw a wrench in things. We're gonna make this a challenge, and our job is to try to figure out how do we change our strategy to make it work. You can make it fun, but it's a challenge. Generalization is it's the whole point of learning, right? We want students to be able to take what we teach them and use it other places, not just with us in front of us in the classroom. So it's our biggest goal, and it's our biggest challenge for sure. I'm not sure how soon we're running to the next session, but I'm happy to keep answering questions if people want to keep typing them in the chat. I'll just keep an eye on it here.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for sharing your expertise with us. I think a lot of people got a lot out of the breakout sessions and actually kind of diving in and trying to come up with some strategies that they can use in their classrooms. So we really appreciate you joining us this morning. The participants do have a break until 10:30. We'll be right back here at 10:30 for the next session. If anybody wants to stay on and chit chat or has any questions, you're welcome to do that. If not, you can mute yourself and turn your camera off, and we'll see you back at 10:30.
I'll hang out for a few minutes to see if anyone wants to ask any more questions or chat.
Okay, thank you. So Tara, you had a question about the high leverage practice book. There's a high leverage practice in special education book, which talks about the 22 high leverage practices in the 4 areas. And then there's another book that is high leverage practices in the inclusive classroom. And I think that's the one Dr. Morano was referring mostly to today. So there's 2 different versions.
Yeah, the high leverage practices for inclusive classrooms book is a little bit more in depth and a little bit more applied than the other text. The other text sort of defines everything, all the practices really clearly. The inclusive classrooms text gives a little bit more information on how you might actually apply them and how apply the HLPs in the classroom.
I have a question about the summarizing. So once the kids are comfortable with using the strategy, I find that I've taught 4th grade for 6 years and now I'm in 3rd grade. The problem is not so much the strategy as much as it is, they can't spell the words or they don't know the words to write. What can you talk a little bit about strategizing how to help them? I've used highlighters, but some of the special ed students are not able to fluently write.
Right. So they can summarize verbally, like they could tell you verbally what a summary of a text or a paragraph or something would be, but they couldn't write it, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a struggle across content areas. I think, I mean, in general, it's important to keep working on those basic skills at the same time that you're doing the grade level work around summarizing and, whatever else, so that students are getting stronger in their writing skills as you're going. But some things that you can try, like as scaffolds or supports, are things like sentence starters for students, or guided notes versions of responses where they're just filling in like a few key pieces of information versus having to write out full sentences. You could rather than require like an open written response, you could give sort of a multiple choice type assessment where students are just choosing an answer that makes the most sense. So it depends on, I guess, what your purpose for getting them to respond is. If it's just practice with summarizing, I think you could use any of those things and they're still getting the practice with summarizing, even if they're not able to write really fluently.
I like what you said when you said doing the multiple choice or using like sentence starters. So I think I'll go from there, and I think that will help me.
Yeah, I mean, you want to think about what your purpose is. So if it's just working on summarizing, they're still needing to summarize if you're using those sorts of supports, right? If you want to work on writing simultaneously at the same time, then, you want them writing, but you want to maybe make that the focus versus make the focus on summarizing.